Everyone. I'm David Egan-Robertson. I'm with the UW-Madison Applied Population Laboratory. And over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about this year's enrollment projections for the Sun Prairie Area School District. The results and graphs I'll be showing in this presentation are included in our report. If you want to get into more detail, you can work through the report itself. But with this talk, I'm highlighting the results and explaining our methodology. So what I'll be covering tonight, the district's recent enrollment history, and how our last set of projections performed compared to your fall 2024 enrollment. And then I'll cover the projections. How many students do we expect through our projections work over the next 10 years? And then finally, how did we get there? I'll cover the methods we used to develop projections, which involve projecting births, 5K kindergarten, and grade progression ratios. Now, I always like to start with some caveats about projections. We produce a range of projections, and this is to reflect uncertainty in projections. Projecting is an imprecise science, so we always provide a range of potential outcomes. We make some assumptions about births from which your pre-K, 4K, and 5K kindergarten projected classes are built. Data from the state comes to us only at a municipal level, based on municipalities. So if a school district's boundaries don't follow municipal boundaries precisely, we make a judgment call on which communities to include and exclude. In addition, there's no good source about movement of families. The grade progression ratios, or GPRs for short, are the only way we can capture year-over-year change in enrollment. So migration is actually implicit in our projections. It's not explicit in our modeling. And finally, projections smooth out volatility. And I put on the screen here your birth history in the Sun Prairie area. And you can see an indicator like births bounce up and down from year to year. Chances are that your actual year-to-year changes will show more up and down patterns than our projections do. So first, on to the numbers. Let's look at your recent enrollment history and how our projections, which we last prepared in late 2023, fared in predicting the fall 2024 enrollment for you. So here's a graph of your total enrollment. This is PK through 12. These are your enrollment counts over the last 10 years. And across the decade, you've added about 6% more students. But there were three distinct periods which caught my eye in terms of someone who looks at these numbers a lot. You had a strong gain of about 5% in the first 3 years, but then you had a period of time where there was some decline, not much, minus 2% over several years. And then in the last 2 years, you've now returned to a pattern of gaining, about 3% gain over the last 2 years. The red dash at the upper right indicates the approximate range of our projections from last year. And we were about 2.5% low. I noted that your 9th grade was larger than anticipated this year. And also you had an uptick in open enrollment, particularly at the high school level this year. Again, just looking at your history again a little bit, this is patterns based on your grade groupings in your schools. So 4K in elementary grades, 4K has fallen by about 70 across the decade, or about 14%. 5K through 5th has declined by 100, or about 3% down. In contrast, your middle school and high school, middle schools and high schools, 6th through 8th have gained nearly 200 over the last decade, or about 12% up. And then 9th through 12th grade has grown substantially, about 450 or 19%. And some, in broad terms, your lower grades have seen a decline, but the upper grades have been increasing. I mentioned earlier the open enrollment issue. And what we've seen in your data is showing is an uptick in open enrollment incoming students. And you've been averaging about 370 in the past 3 years compared to about 300 in the prior 6 years. And so the net change, which we also look at, the difference between your in and out open enrollment totals, your net open enrollment gain in the last 2 years has been about plus 80. So that was just covering the past a little bit. What about the future? So as I mentioned, we produce 4 projections, not just one, to give a sense of the potential range of student counts in the future. So here, again, is the district's past 10 years. This is the full PK through 12 enrollment. And here are the results of the 4 models. In 5 years, the projections range from about 8,400, a little under 8,400 to a little over 9,100. So it's about 200 lower to 520 or so higher than your current enrollment. So a difference about -2 to +6%. Remember that from the prior slide, remember that you've gained about 6% over the past 10 years. So our models here are showing the possibility of maybe gaining 6% over the next 5 years. We do carry the projections out 10 years, but we emphasize them for the first 5 years because most children entering their schooling beyond that year haven't been born yet, which makes projections a little trickier. Looking at specific grade groupings, here's the history of your 5K, your elementary grades, 5K through 5th. In 5 years, our projections are in a fairly tight range, about 3,400 up to 3,575, a numeric change of possibly a loss of 80 up to +90, or about -2 to +3%. Your middle school, 6th to 8th grades. The 4 models increase for a few years as right now you have a larger 4th and 5th grade, those classes age forward. Your middle schools will bump up over the next couple of years, but then the models slip slightly as now younger cohorts enter the middle school. So in 5 years, we're projecting a range from about 1710 up to 1920. Numeric change of -145 to +65, or -8 to +4% in percentage terms. And finally, your high schools. In 5 years, our projections range from about 2725 up to 3130, numeric change of -60 to +350, or -2 to +12%. Now, the high model here, I decided to use a 2-year trend. In the past, we've sometimes used trend 3 years, the 3 most recent years. But with that uptick you've had in your enrollment in the last 2 years, I decided to go with the 2-year trend. The high school student counts have grown 10% over the past 3 years. So using this very short-term trend is pushing up that particular set of projections in this case. So that's a run through of the numbers. What about our methods? How did we get here? So I'll explain the projection models that we use. So there are 3 primary building blocks for the projections. There's the projection of births, projections of 5K kindergartners, and grade progression ratios. So here's your birth history since 2006, when some of your current seniors were born. As you can see, there's a little bit of a bounce up and down over time, but generally between 500 and 600 annually. And in 2023, what's the most recent year for which we can get births through the Department of Health Services. The births in 2023 were 44 fewer than in 2006. So if we project on a long-term basis across this whole period of time, it shows a slight decline. I mean, actually, at the end of this projections period, the number projected is basically the same as the actual count of births in 2023. If we use a shorter term pattern, just the last 9 years, show a little bit of an uptick. So both trending methods do stay within this sort of 500 to 600 bounds of your past history. So these seem like pretty reasonable predictors of future births in the Sun Prairie area. The second building block we use is 5-year-old kindergartners. So here's your 5K student count for the past 10 years, and not in like bursts. They bounce up and down. There's some up and down variation across time. But as it turns out, your 5K count in this past fall, 2024, is exactly the same as it was in the fall of 2015. The projection using these past counts, assuming the longer range pattern holds, future 5K classes may decrease slightly, about 5 to 6 students per year. If the more recent pattern holds, it basically holds the 5K kindergarten population steady across the projection period. The final building block are grade progression ratios. In a nutshell, we're capturing the change in class cohorts as they age through their schooling from year to year. Then we average these changes over 3 different time frames and apply them extending out into the future. So I'm hoping my illustration here works okay with this presentation. So just to try to get a sense of how we do this, if you look at your 4th to 5th grade progressions, what I've circled here with these red circles, in 2016-17, you had 600 5th graders. The prior year, your 4th grade was 578. So you had an increase. So the ratio there is about 1.04, about 4% more students in the 5th grade compared to the previous 4th grade class. And conversely, occasionally run into situations, of course, where classes shrink. From the 2018-19 4th grade of 617, your 5th grade the next year had dropped to 597. So that 5th grade class was about 97% of its prior. So it lost about 3 students per 100. So we know down at the bottom, this is where all our averages show up. And I've got it outlined in the red box at the bottom of this slide. So you can see for the 4th to 5th grade transitions, all of them are just above 1. And these translate to basically 1 to 2% higher. So over time, over a number of different time periods that we look at, it's showing some increase from year to year. In this particular case, the 4th to 5th grade transition. So we have our 3 different modeling methods where we use these grade progression ratios, and this illustrates all 3 of them put together. In some Perry's case, most grade transitions are above 1, meaning that your class cohorts tend to increase in size as they advance from grade to grade. You see particularly large spikes at the 8 to 9 transition, and this is influenced by students moving from private schools into the public high school. Note too that the blue line, that's the 2-year trend, these GPRs are highest, and the baseline and 5-year trends, which use longer historical patterns that capture some years when your student counts decline, they have more muted GPRs than those generated from the past 2 years. So to summarize all of the information I put in here, let me bring up to get the slide going here. Some Prairie area school districts total PK to 12 enrollment has risen over the last 10 years. You're up about 470 students, or about 6%. The first 3 years, you didn't have rising enrollment. Then you had 4 years where there was some decline. And then for the last 2 years, your total enrollment's been going up again. Your 4K and 5K through 5th classes are smaller, and your 6th and 8th 6th through 8th and 9th through 12th grades are larger. So bursts in the areas I showed are generally remaining level. Again, 5K kindergarten also, remaining level. One model showed a little bit of a drop, but nothing too severe. And your grade progression ratios, as I pointed out, are mostly above 1, so indicative of class cohorts growing as they age forward. And also another factoid, I guess I'd say, between when you compare the district's number of households with children at the 2020 census compared to the 2010 census, you actually had 13% more household with children, and that bucked the trend of the state, which actually saw a drop of about 5.5% in households with children. So to summarize then, the projections are future trends. The change in the total students is projected to range from about -2% to +6% over the next 5 years. And numerically, as I have here, about 200, possibly 210 students decrease up to a 520 student increase. Your elementary classes projected to range from about -2% to +3%. Middle schools, the change may range from -8% to about 4% positive. And finally, high schools, change may range from -2% to +12%. One thing that's interesting in doing these projections was, and I noticed, is that using that longer historic time frame, the baseline, which makes use of all 10, the history of the past 10 years, the 5-year trend, which makes use of the 5 most recent years, generally those are predicting declines. And those where I was modeling using the shorter time frames, the 2-year trend and the kindergarten trend predict increases. So thank you very much for watching this presentation, and I will be available at the board meeting on February 10th to answer any questions you might have.